have the pleasure and joy to introduce Mary McFarland to you. Some of you who are at Gonzaga or maybe even Regis might have met Mary in her work as Dean of School of Professional Studies at Gonzaga and her work in teaching nursing. She's been a fellow with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Nurses Executives, and served on many corporate and nonprofit boards. But the reason I asked Mary to be with us is because Mary is a co-founder of something called Jesuit Worldwide Learning. And how many of you have heard of the Jesuit Commons, Jesuit Worldwide Learning? Well, it's one of the reasons I invited her. Because I know particularly students have not. And it's sort of an incredible organization that reaches out to refugee camps with the help, well, she can explain it all, but in terms of educating those refugees and giving them the opportunity of higher ed. So, again, I don't think that all of you students are here to sign up to help teach those courses, but I think we can start imagining not just how Alpha Sigma Nu could be aware and maybe partner in some way, but also, to me, Mary is somebody who looked at an opportunity and maybe even a dream, and along with Jesuit colleagues made it happen. And so I thought that would be particularly inspirational for all of us. So I'm delighted that she came, and she's one of those West Coast leaders that we don't hear often enough from. And so I'm just very glad to introduce you to Mary McFarland.
And that was the best part of what I had to say. It is just a tremendous treat to be here with all of you, and I was so grateful when Kate invited me, both because the overarching context of our next 45 minutes together is really to think about change makers, change making, and hopefully it will link to some of what you are doing the rest of your conference as well for Alpha Sigma Nu. And embedded in that will be the story as a case of Jesuit Worldwide Learning, which is a major work of the Society of Jesus. So I will be sharing that story with you. Let's see if this will go this way. A few years ago, I heard Father Steve Prevet, who is President Emeritus of the University of San Francisco. And are you from San Francisco? All right, several people. And I thought this made such sense. He just said, educate people with the brains to make a difference and a heart to want to do so. Who better than Alpha Sigma Nu, right? Your board, your faculty advisors, you as student chapter leaders, and your colleagues when you get back home. So when we think about change makers and all that goes into that, it's not new, right? For centuries we've had people who have created change. So we think back maybe to the European Renaissance. During that era we had change makers who brought to us things like the printing press. So it actually made access to information available to the masses, right? Knowledge development, people could start to learn together. The mechanical clock was invented. It gave people a frame of time for how they could convene at a similar time. The canon was invented. So, change maker in the context of societal change. When we think about the canon, there's many references to power, certainly to war and conflict, but for us at Jesuit universities, we know what a difference that invention made in the life of St. Ignatius. So we fast forward to 1491, St. Ignatius is born. As a young man, he's injured by a cannonball blast. Just think about that connection over time, because I think it will help us frame, and hopefully, certainly as you think about your own work with Alpha Sigma Nu and other areas, that things take time before we realize the impact. On the cannonball, St. Ignatius, it's what really forced him, right, to listen and read about the saints. It got him on his pilgrimage, on his conversion, and the founding of the Jesuits. As a significant change maker, St. Ignatius recognized education matters. It is going to transform the world. And in his early vision, it was education for all, education gratis. Everybody should have access. So you fast forward to today, where we have over 65.5 million people in forced human migration. Many of those are refugees. Of the refugees, the United Nations High Commission on Refugees in 2014 set for the first time a goal that 1% of refugees should have access to higher ed. So when we think about change and going back to St. Ignatius, clearly we have a huge population in the world of people who cannot afford education as it's currently priced. But we have enough, even if we look at the Jesuit universities around the world, and how do we bring that together to create this change that St. Ignatius thought about. Connecting on from St. Ignatius, we look to the 1960s when Father Arrupe was elected Superior General of the Jesuits. Father Arrupe brought to his term as Father General from his life in 1945, being at Hiroshima when the atomic bomb went off. And rather than fleeing that experience, he went out to the people. That and other experiences shaped his view of what Jesuit higher education and what the Society of Jesus should do. So one of the things that we think about as change makers is these significant turning points that happen in life. They happen to all of us, right? And it's a matter then of what do we do about it? So you think, again, St. Ignatius gets his leg severely wounded by a cannonball. What did he do with that turning point? Father Arrupe had several turning points. What did he do about them? And as we look at our lives, what will we do with our turning points as far as being change makers? Father Arrupe also gave us that wonderful quote on love and imagination. And imagination, as we go into the case study of Jesuit Worldwide Learning, is really key. And that is his prayer or short essay where he simply reminds us that imagination, what we fall in love with, it'll change everything. And he wrote, it'll change what gets us out of bed in the morning, what we read, who we're with, what breaks our heart, what fills us with joy. So when you think about imagination, with the energy that goes into change making, and they are so connected. For this topic of change and change making, sometimes I used to wish that there was a recipe, but there isn't. Not even in the literature. But we know that there are some criteria. And I hope that this again will help travel through other discussions that you're having. But to think about this turning points, the importance of doing your homework. This group knows that. It isn't going into change making willy-nilly or on opinion or on a whim. We have to have the data, we need to know what we're doing, and then we need to go forward. So risk-taking, that ability to roll the dice, coupled with the homework that's done, becomes really key. Don't wait to be right. I so often will hear people say, but we don't have all the facts. Well, we will never have all the facts. And if we wait for all the facts, that's all we're going to get done. This part obviously makes a difference on where you are in your career or your experience. Some people don't have the luxury of getting experience when they're thrown into change making. Other times we can surround ourselves with other experts, and that was certainly the case with Jesuit Worldwide Learning, hired at the margins. I think for all of us to remember as change makers that in those moments when we start to feel hesitant or think it's too big, we can't do it, is to remember it's not about us. It's about our ability to garner this network so that we can go forward as needed. It takes a lot of courage because there's a lot of times that we're going to doubt ourselves. Courage is not a field that is overcrowded today. There is room for all of us. We can have a courageous voice. When I was much younger in my career, I used to think if I feel my heart rate go up and I think I'm going to lose my breath if I try to talk, that I've got to get through that. That's the one I have to talk about. I have to say something. So whatever your trigger points are, don't talk yourself out of it. If it needs to be said, it might not be perfect, but get your idea on the table. There is an artist on the Oregon coast, Marianne Hershey, and she writes about courage. And she wrote a card that just says, "Courage does not always roar. Sometimes courage is that quiet voice at the end of the day that says simply, 'I will try again tomorrow.'" With change making, that's part of the spirit of it. Persistence, certainly. I thought Father Sundberg this morning did a fabulous job challenging our thinking about how do we change our lens and not get too embedded in our own culture so that we can't even hear the voice of others. That's going to be key for change making. Believe even when nobody else does. The comfort zone is a huge magnet. People who love us want us to stay there because it's risky and frightening for our family, our friends, our universities as well. But change makers, obviously, as a human, we have to go back into that zone every once in a while just to get nourished, but you cannot stay there very long. So that comfort zone is going to require a lot of belief in oneself and in the idea, because there will be hundreds of voices that will tell you it's wrong. You can't do it, it can't be done. And it's just a matter of listen to what's a grain of truth. Why do they think that? What do we need to do about it? And then we go forward. Before going to the case study of Jesuit Worldwide Learning, I would appreciate it if you just think for a few minutes about what's on your mind about something that needs to be changed. Something that you'd actually be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work on. You know, there's that wonderful adage that vision without the heavy lifting is just a hallucination. It won't happen if we don't roll up our sleeves and go after it, and it's not a 10-minute job. For me, the work with Jesuit Worldwide Learning, when I look back on my career, probably started in childhood. I didn't know it then, but we just keep taking steps on this journey. So what haunts you? What do you think about? I love the questions today to Father Sundberg. So many things came up that I thought, wow, people take that on. If you would, just write down on your own piece of paper or in your own mind something that haunts you. I hope there's more time just informally to ask each other a little bit about what was your answer to what haunts you, because we all have things, right, when we wake up and it's just on our mind and we can't shake it off, and that's part of the trigger on this haunts me. It's like sand under our fingernail, we just can't let it go. So how do you find other kindred spirits? And you have a built-in network here that's pretty fabulous. And then you multiply that by Jesuit higher ed around the world, and there will be other kindred spirits out there. The one that haunts me that I want to share just a little bit about is this area of access. So I started in my career as a nurse, and early on in my career, I noticed that people who had the ability to read, they were literate, they could understand terminology, so they could understand what was being talked about in their health. They had a support system. They had a different outcome on their health choices. And another huge part was if they even had access to health care. I've often lived in rural areas, and sometimes rural people actually don't want a lot of access. They want to just figure it out. But when they need access, do they have it? So this idea of how do we make sure people have at least the ability to access if they want it. Thanks to my husband, I got into higher education in the early 90s and teaching nursing, and then starting to get more involved with just overall aspects of higher education, and joined Gonzaga in 1998. About 2001, I was asked, 2002, by our president at the time if I could help start some distance learning, which is kind of a misnomer because there's nothing distance about distance learning. It actually really connects us. So as the Dean of the School of Professional Studies, which was health and leadership, undergraduate through doctoral, I had an amazing group of faculty, university resources, a Jesuit network, the conference groups of deans, and I know there's other conference groups in the Jesuit higher ed network, but we had a fabulous group of people that came together, and several universities were starting to engage in virtual learning. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when you think about the internet becoming really robust. Was just like around 2003, 04 that we really started to get into online learning. So this question of access, it was the sand under my fingernails, because we started to see all the time the number of students that could join our graduate programs because we offered them online. Our president at the time used to say, "What is the largest university in Florida?" Because there isn't one. But he would always say it's Gonzaga, because we had so many graduate students from Florida in our online program. We learned a lot from Regis University and other universities that were also getting into the online environment, and shared that with our conference group. So that became a network that we looked for at the dinners or any conference. The question started to be, if we can get to every state in the U.S., technology is there now. We could reach people. Carrie, I was touched in your talk when you said the Jesuits have always been about getting out to the people. St. Ignatius did not say to people, everybody come to Rome and good luck and too bad if you can't get there. He sent his companions out to the world, and he helped us know we need to use the tools of the time. So the tools of our time include technology, so that we can reach each other. So that became a haunting question. In about 2006-07, we held we being the Jesuit Conference Group of Adult Programs, held a meeting at Regis on, it was a worldwide meeting on this topic of how do we reach where people don't have education. Father Michael Smith, a Jesuit from Australia, originally from New Zealand, came. He had just come home from the Thai-Burma border at a refugee camp, and he described watching people literally stand and watch their lives go by. And he said, isn't there something we could do? And I just felt the hair in the back of my head stand up, and I thought, well, we've got the technology, so surely, and we've got a worldwide Jesuit higher ed network. So at the time, my husband Tom and I, Tom is a professor of education. I had been the dean for about 11 years, so I asked if I could have off over from like Thanksgiving to the 1st of December so it didn't miss a lot of school. But I knew the parts that we had done on getting online programs started. Tom knew Ed Tech, and so we went to the Thai-Burma border and helped Australia Catholic get started with their online program from Australia Catholic to the Thai-Burma border with refugees from Burma. I know it's Myanmar, but I still have in my head the refugees, and some of them would still make a small B, and they would say it is a small B until they change how life is there for people. So I think things have gotten significantly better in Myanmar, so I need to start to make my own transition. We spent about 2.5 months with a group of 20 who came out of the camps illegally. Australia Catholic sponsored a safe house for them. It was a turning point moment for me, I think for my husband, and I found when I came back to my work as the dean that faculty, students, people would come in with very valid issues, worries, resource needs, but I realized they weren't my worries anymore. So it was time then to let the new person come in for that. And about the same time, Father Charlie Curry, who is an icon in Jesuit higher ed, several other people in the dean's group. So there was a small group of people who got together and said, you know, if we had some funding, we could do this. We could get higher education to where it isn't. So thanks to Charlie, Father Peter Belais, and others, a grant was received, and we were able to start Jesuit Worldwide Learning Higher Education at the Margins. And in those years it was called Jesuit Commons Higher Ed at the Margins. We changed the name in 2016 to be more representative of it. What we did at the beginning was we used the Human Development Index. It's an index from the United Nations and other organizations that help us look at the world. In orange and red, what you see is the hot spots. These are the places in the world where conflict is rampant. One of the things that we found was in the hot zones, in the red and orange, that it was high conflict, low education, high poverty. It's not a surprise, right? If you don't have education, it's hard to get out of poverty. If you are poor, you are idle, there is risk. People will come and take advantage. So we looked at these areas, and in 2010 launched what was then JCHEM, today JWL. We started as a pilot. I was hired as the first president, the first international director to co-found this, because there were many co-founders of, again, kindred spirits. We looked at the Human Development Index. Peter Belais at the time was International Director of Jesuit Refugee Service, and he said without hesitating, we'll be your partner on the ground. We can get access to the refugees. Father Mike Sheeran at the time was president at Regis, and he and his team said Regis can help award this first academic diploma. And when Father John Fitzgibbons followed him without hesitating, John was, no, we're in, we're going to do this. And I'll talk about other partners in just a minute. We started in Aleppo, in Syria, in Kakuma camp, in northern Kenya. In 2010, there were 87,000 people there. Today, it runs between 187 and 200,000. The refugees come primarily from South Sudan, Somalia, and then all the surrounding areas. Zalika camp in Malawi, and that was a camp of about 17,000 and runs today about 23,000. And that's with the country of Malawi often threatening to move all the refugees. So in Syria, in about early 2012, our center was bombed, and our students obviously fled, and people moved to Amman, Jordan, and that's where we still are today. Today we're in 13 different countries. We've served over 6,000 students in the diploma program and many more in shorter courses. A question that we're frequently asked is, why educate refugees? If it's people who can't work, because countries where refugees are forbid people to be employed because of competition with their own citizens of that country. So think about that, because I thought it was a great question, and it really made us go to the heart of what is the purpose of education. Because some say it's employment. Thank goodness for Jesuit higher education. We know that higher ed in the Jesuit tradition is about humanity. How do we make this world a better place? How do we engage fully as humans? An elder in Chad, when I was there, I asked if, we always do an assessment, so I asked, is this camp ready? Would you have people interested in this higher ed program? And he himself was illiterate. And he stood and he said, if we had had education in Darfur, we would not be refugees today, but they caught us unaware. Education helps us discern, critically think, and we don't buy everything we hear. That really helped me with also the answer on the question. Through the years, it has been clear that there truly is a war on education in conflict zones. Rebel groups and others do not want people educated. It's a threat. People start to question things. They start to not be caught unaware. So when you think about governments, and some are blatant wars, like in conflict zones, some are more subtle, like what we're seeing here in the United States. Some of you are probably in teacher education programs. I hope so. We need incredible teachers. But you talk to teachers today in the United States, and I hope that's on somebody's list as a change maker item. So there's blatant and there's more subtle. Here's some things on the war on education. I will just share, in the places like Somalia, Darfur, Iraq, the stories of what the rebel groups do to prevent families from sending their kids to school. Universities are raided, professors are shot in front of their students, children are kidnapped so families will flee. The stories go on and on, but at the core of it is rebel groups do not want people educated. It's a threat. And when we think about what we have with Jesuit higher education, and you add the moral, the social commitments, it's not what people want. This is just one quick picture from Aleppo right before the center was bombed, like by a few months. What you're looking at is a group of students. The heat had been cut off, the electricity was cut off. We had one night left of a class, and we always do blended learning with JWL, which means we have an online component supported by on-site. So we hire somebody on-site to facilitate discussions. The facilitator thought nobody's coming, and he thought, though, I better open the center just in case. So he went. What you're seeing is every student showed up. There were no lights, so they lit candles. They studied by candlelight, and they finished the last project of the course. We see that kind of hunger for education every place we are. During 2010 to 2013, that led us to the JWL mission and vision, very aware of this hunger. And it's sometimes a physical hunger because people will sometimes sell their food ration so they can have pencils or transportation to get to school. We don't charge tuition, we do scholarship, and then we use a work-study model where everybody contributes to the learning center. But you still, if you're studying, you're not at a place where you can get even an incentive wage. So some students told us of selling their food so that they would have money to come. There's a spiritual hunger and an intellectual hunger. People tell us all the time that they know they cannot participate fully in their humanity if they can't get an education. We're so used to it, right? Many of our cities have many universities and colleges, but there are countries around the world where there's one. There's one, and people can't get there. So I hope you'll come on the website and look at this. I'm just going to share just the vision and mission. I do want to take just a second and share with you over the course of the pilot, and now what sustains us is we looked for a model, and part of the job of the first 3 years is what is a model of bringing Jesuit higher education around the world that would be sustainable, scalable, and transferable. Sustainable over time, scalable to the need, and education that would be transferable across cultures, ethnic groups, religions. So we've talked several times today this issue of global thinking. How do we get there? Well, one way is to have a global classroom where you actually meet each other, and in the JWL classroom we always mix the groups. So if you and I are here in Seattle, but you might be in a group in the online course with students from Malawi and Sri Lanka and Kakuma, and I'm with people from Afghanistan and North Iraq, and then when we do our on-site conversation, we bring in what we learned online. The global thinking is phenomenal. A student in the world religion class told us at the end when the faculty member said, "What are you taking from this?" And he was a Muslim man, and he wrote and he said, "Until I took this class, I didn't realize that where I was born affected what my religion is." And it just really struck me when the faculty member shared that, because I thought, I was born in Dubuque, Iowa, 98% Catholic at the time. There is no way I was going to be Muslim. He was born in Somalia. There is no way that he was going to become Buddhist or Hindu or most likely Catholic. So this idea, and then he ended with, so maybe we don't kill each other for where we're born. Those are the things that happen in a global classroom. And I know we have some faculty members here teaching with JWL right now, and it's those moments, those insights that happen. I do want to send out a big thank you to, under the strategic partnerships, universities. This work could not happen without the universities and professors who step up to the plate. It could not happen without the students who say, I have a lot to learn and I have a lot to offer. It is not a one-way street. We all learn together. We learn always in the class about the global thinking. Even one word can mean something so different to so many different people. So we can't not do it anymore. We have to find ways to connect across this world, because simple misunderstandings are creating conflicts. I mean, violent conflicts. And if we have a way to understand, sometimes it's as simple as a greeting, or instead of shaking hands, if somebody offers an arm, I mean, there are little things that create big problems. But if we're together, it starts to make sense. After the graduation, just 1 second, sorry. I missed the Ignatian experience. That's key. So all of our courses are developed with an Ignatian pedagogical frame. So that reflection that Father Sundberg talked about, the fellow students in Kakuma camp or Amman or Zalika, they're saying the same thing. They're saying, is this another reflection? But for them, they usually follow it with, it's like the first time in my life somebody cared what I thought, because they're more on a memorization system. So it's pretty significant. I want you to hear just a couple of our students, as only as a few seconds. Both of these are refugees. They're living in Amman right now. But just to hear for a second what they have to say. We offer the program in English, but students sometimes when they describe the experience will use their own language. So you'll hear one student in English, one student in Arabic.
After the graduation is just great, like having a nice experience with dealing with people from different culture, and as well learning some skills that would help us to be a case manager in the future. So this is just wonderful.
تقريبا هذا كل شيء يعني التعليم مهم لأي شخص بالطفل وقت ما يكون صغير لغاية تكبر. صعب نفهم الحياة أكثر، نفهم الأشخاص، نحسن نبني مستقبلنا، نبني عملنا على أساس التعليم. وبدون التعليم طبعا يوجد التخلف والجهل.
Back to that question of why educate those at the margins. And the story of the man from Chad, you see our student here, his reason, otherwise you have backwardness and ignorance. We had a Somali woman in Kakuma camp who, I always share that question with the students because I say, what would you say? And this young woman from Somalia just said, we don't seek education for a job. We seek education to fight ignorance. And I thought when he said the same thing in Amman, that's pretty great. I'm not going to go through these other than I know a number of you, I just kind of heard a couple people mention climate change and other issues that could be a key change agent strategy. JWL, a partner of ours, is UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, and we're very committed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are some that are linked directly to the strategic plan of JWL, and you can get more information on that again either from our website or I'd be glad to connect you. Research is key. We know we have to have data on what is the impact of higher ed, and this is another area that those of you with Alpha Sigma Nu might have interest in. So we are collecting data, we are trying to get longitudinal studies. Father Nicky is here from Marquette, he's on our research committee. So we know how important it is. We're connecting with universities who have especially graduate and doctoral programs who might want to help within this. And that's all I'll say, just as a plug of if you're interested or that's an area, keep us in mind. And finally, your call to action, back again to what haunts you. The quote at the bottom, goals are dreams with timelines. If over time you get clearer about this is an issue that needs change, to put a timeline to it, cue yourself, maybe even 2 weeks from now on your calendar, see if your small group discussion, if anything, still perks back for you of this needs some attention. The website for JWL is there. Ignacio and others have mentioned the new International Association of Jesuit Universities. At the meeting in Bilbao, Father Sosa, Father General, encouraged people to, well, as one president said, I no longer hear it as a suggestion, I hear it as a mandate that Jesuit universities around the world must connect to the margins. And one key way, there's many, but one way is by participation with Jesuit Worldwide Learning. And then your Alpha Sigma Nu, what a connection. Kate and the team that you rave about always, I mean, it's phenomenal. And to hear Carrie say 90,000 people, plus then you multiply that by the Jesuit universities around the world, and there isn't anything that isn't achievable. I'll just close with a quote from a student of ours in Malawi, and he had traveled for about 4 months by foot over pretty dangerous territory to get to the refugee camp. And he was a student and he was going to graduate, and I was doing exit interviews, and he just stopped in the midst of telling the story of how he got there and how devastating it was to think that he couldn't continue his education, and then he found out he could because of this kind of the online on-site program. And he just stopped and he said, you see, then I was nowhere, and I am not yet where I'm going, but I'm somewhere. And I feel like that's maybe where we are with JWL. Maybe you feel the same about Alpha Sigma Nu. We aren't there yet, but we're somewhere. So thank you so much, and now we just have a few minutes yet for questions. All right. Thank you. Or comments, please.
I go to Gonzaga, by the way.
Go Zags.
So something I've been thinking about a lot is how can genuine education still make a difference in the lives of students who aren't Catholic. Because like at Gonzaga, 53% of the university identified as Catholic, but the rest not. But I still think they can get something out of these Jesuit values. So how have you been able to implement Jesuit values in when you bring education models to societies which are not even close to being predominant Catholic?
It's a great question, and one of the things that we're very clear with on all of our locations is that we are it's Jesuit higher education with the focus on transforming the world together, transforming our thinking, but it is not in any way limited to those who are Catholic, that it is a Jesuit value and approach, and the Catholic mission is very prominent, but we make it clear that this is open to everybody because we need to learn from everybody. So it's very welcoming. Again, the world religion class, we have sometimes in one online class, we will have Christians of many denominations, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindu, Native African religions, and it's just fascinating. And there is a sense, I think of what we try to do is this reality about acceptance, and for the greater glory of God, we meet as people, and we do have different beliefs. We often get the question from the students of what is a Jesuit, and so it's a great opening for explaining the Catholic religion, the Jesuit order. We use the life of Ignatius in the bridge course as a turning point, so they get introduced not to the saint, but to the man, Ignatius. And we use the cannonball as really a turning point for what happened, because for so many of them, they have had to flee horrible situations, and they get this peace, this connection with Ignatius. And a lot of the students will go on and read about Saint Ignatius, and they begin to learn more. They're on their phones a lot. They'll go on. I didn't explain enough on it. So Gonzaga is a major partner. Regis, Creighton University now has our diploma students come into bachelor program online. We have Georgetown University is significant in our technology support. So many of the Jesuit universities are engaged, and now especially in India and some in Asia. But back to your question, it's just really an invitation to come learn all you can about us, about what it is to be Jesuit higher ed, what it means to be Jesuit Catholic faith, and we want to hear about yours. Thanks, great question. Please.
Yeah, just maybe a little anecdote on how this is working. At St. Joseph's University, where I am, we have had faculty in our business school and our economics department teach for some years. We also have so that's been really important because our faculty, in some ways, who are not all that engaged on mission, have done this teaching, and all of a sudden, Jesuit education is transformed for them, and they really get it in a deep way. We had one faculty member who insisted on going to the graduation in Malawi. They told her, you can't. You just literally can't. It would be impossible for you to get there. But she was so moved by this, that's what she wanted for her 60th birthday, was to go to Malawi. But just this summer, we have a committee on our campus at St. Joseph's who helps resettle refugees in Philadelphia. And one family that they were helping resettle, this woman and her two sons, didn't her 22-year-old son come with his transcript from Regis University with his 6 credits and was talking about how can I continue my education here? I've got these 6 credits that I can bring. And it was very powerful. He's since taken a job opportunity in Texas. He will, I think, be able to continue through either Regis or Creighton. But it's just really powerful to see that. If he had stayed in Philadelphia, we would have done our best to see if he could matriculate to our place. So this thing is really, really transforming lives and working in the deepest and most personal ways, especially among our faculty.
Thank you for sharing that. And yes, the faculty have transformed actually beyond where we ever thought we could be on the curriculum because of what they learn with the students. We had one faculty member write to the others, so let's say there's 40 students in one course. We limit our class sizes. We try to keep them 15 to 17, so a course might have 40 and we break it into sections, just like you might have different sections on site. So one class might need to have 5 faculty. And the faculty get together, then they meet each other across the divide and start to share the experience. And one faculty who was a Jesuit, and he wrote to the others and said, "Is anybody else grading these papers with your jaw open?" I thought that's pretty good. Thanks so much for that and for all the engagement. All right. Kate?
So, obviously I have a little bit of a hidden agenda about asking Mary. Because it's not that I really think all of a sudden Alpha Sigma Nu is going to jump into the middle of this, but I'm curious, Mary, you've engaged Jesuit higher ed faculty. In your dreaming, is there a role for Jesuit higher ed students to connect with your students?
Absolutely, and actually, again, Creighton is leading the way with this. And having Dr. Martha Habish wrote a grant. Creighton opened an internal grant process, and we had, starting last year, the first time Creighton students, undergraduate, in the same courses with our students at the margins. So they're starting to learn together, and the students at the margins want to meet you. They always asked us that first 3 years, where are the students from the other Jesuit universities? And we told them, right now we're a pilot and we need to know with you, is that something that's workable? Because most of our students at the margin, English is second, third, fourth language. And we knew within 1 year that would work to mix student groups. So thanks to Creighton, we're finally doing that. And after Bilbao, I think many universities are starting to think about that. We also have what we call online tutors, and a colleague Jody at Regis runs that. And our online tutors, they help students in different discrete ways, like it might be read a paper and give some feedback.
I'll just talk about, I think it did die. But one, helping with like just feedback on a paper or maybe talking over Zoom on English. But we do orient people. We don't just put you out there to do that, because there's also just important things we have to be aware of. Political things that could actually cost somebody their life in a camp, or on a smaller scale, a lot of trouble for a family. So we do orientation, so we have people ready. And that's our imagination. Think of it now with you all thinking about how could you as students connect in. Because there's a multitude of ways. And again, somebody else had mentioned earlier, the reality is a lot of people can't make those kinds of trips, time, money, expense, climate. So there's all kinds of ways. We Zoom probably 3 times a week. And every time zone in the world. So somebody has to start early, which is usually the West Coast, and somebody's going late, which is usually India or Australia. Nairobi's kind of in the middle at 9, you're at 9 hours, but it's all doable. So please, that's a great question, and if you have other ideas, or here's how a group could help, that would be great to hear more about. I know you've been sitting a long, long time, and I think our time is up with Kate.